Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
One of the hallmarks of good discourse, as we all know, is the ability to disagree without immediately going thermonuclear. I think to varying degrees, this is a concept almost anyone can agree with, especially those of us in the atheist and secular movement who value dialogue about religion and the social issues that intersect with it. By necessity, as activists, we are often engaging with people who have sharply contrasting views to our own. These disagreements obviously vary in scope. Sometimes, internally, activists will disagree on a particular approach to a problem. Do we peacefully petition the government for a change to the law? Do we draw up protest signs and take to the streets? There are sometimes passionate disagreements over those things. Those disagreements rarely spill over into public spats of people shaming each other and dragging each other through the mud. Surely they sometimes do, but that seems to be the exception, not the rule. So when is a disagreement not just a disagreement? As some people may know, Ari and I were recently pretty viciously attacked publicly by another member of the secular community. I'm not going to name names because that doesn't matter so much to the point that I'm trying to make. Here was the situation. I was commenting on a Facebook thread arguing with some people over whether or not the picture of Ellen DeGeneres riding Usain Bolt was racist. The post I was responding to boldly declared that if you thought it was racist, you were an idiot. Being an ally in racial justice issues is super important to me. All of the black activists I know were unhappy, so I saw it as my duty to amplify their voices and argue their point, using my white privilege to gain at least the level of entry to the conversation that would grant me. The person who attacked me was sent screenshots of the conversation and responded to me by posting a picture of a fat, balding, middle-aged man with a 5 o'clock shadow as a reference to me saying, "Sometimes the image is accurate." This was a vicious, sexist, transphobic, fat-shaming attack on me, ostensibly because he thought I was being a bully. The bullying actions he referred to were things like me saying, "If you can't see how this would be racist, you have a lot of self-reflection to do. If this isn't taking a gun to a water balloon fight, I don't know what else is." When we talk about having disagreements, we have to look at exactly what we are disagreeing on. If we're climate change activists and we disagree on how to deal with climate change, we may have a reasonable disagreement. But the fact is, we don't disagree on the most basic reality of the situation. In the trans community, we often disagree about how to approach accomplishing the social change we seek. Some of us are firebrands, some of us are diplomats, some of us are in between, but none of us, almost none of us anyways, disagree on the basic reality of the oppression and marginalization of trans people in society. The point that I'm trying to make here is this. Not every disagreement is just a disagreement. None of these things are simply academic arguments that exist in a vacuum. We're not debating esoteric questions of philosophy or complicated, nigh unsolvable math equations whose answers have little bearing on the reality of the lives of everyday people. I'm perfectly willing to admit to the fact that sometimes I draw hard lines too quickly. I don't ever claim to be a perfect social justice warrior who never gets it wrong or lashes out too quickly. I am absolutely guilty of doing those things sometimes. It's something I'm working on. There's nuance to be discussed there, but though I do see the problems with that way of doing things, there are also some ways in which I will absolutely defend those actions. As I said earlier, these arguments don't happen in a vacuum. These questions have real consequences. Being a firebrand in the pursuit of elevating the position of the marginalized is simply not the same as being a firebrand in defense of the position of the privileged. It's just not, and I refuse to equate the two. For trans people, people of color, and other marginalized groups, what we have at stake is the quality of our lives, our freedom of movement through society, and oftentimes our very lives themselves. The privileged in the conversation, more often than not, have only their feelings at stake. To be clear, that certainly does not give us the right to do or say anything we want in defense of our position. Regardless of the level of disagreement, there are certain things you just never do. It's never, literally never, okay to go after someone's family, someone's personal vulnerabilities, their insecurities, their status as a marginalized person of any kind, their own personal struggles, their bodies, their mental illnesses, and it's 100% never okay to make threats of violence, emotional or physical, in response. I know personal things about the person who attacked me, and it never even occurred to me that I might take advantage of those things to attack him. The guy could have killed my mom, and it wouldn't make those things okay. David Smalley of Dogma Debate recently released a short episode of his show that was a commentary not just on this situation, but a broader commentary on how toxic these situations can be for the movement as a whole. And one of the points he made is a point that I agree with. Oftentimes, social media does remove the humanity from conversations. It inflates our sense of self-importance, and sometimes can make us treat our friends as disposable when they do something we don't like or disagree with. On this particular point, he and I are in near lockstep agreement. What precipitated the downfall of my relationship with the person in question was his sexist and fat-shaming takedown of some secular activists he didn't like. I made the point that sexism, fat-shaming, misogyny, those things don't become okay simply because you don't like a person. Calling those things out as not okay is not the same as defending the actions of a person who you don't like or may have done something that you disagree with. I challenged him and he told me to go fuck myself if I didn't like it. I blocked him from social media and all but summarily dismissed him from my life as a result not just of that, but a pattern of behavior that I saw as bullying, assholish, tyrannically, and wholly disappointing given what I had previously known of his character. If that conversation had happened in real life, would things have turned out differently? It's an almost certain bet that they would have. Would he have told me simply to fuck off if I didn't like it? Would I have completely cut off contact with him and cut him out of my life as a result? I'm guessing the entire situation would have turned out differently. We both likely would have behaved differently. This is a particular situation where David and I agree. Even if I thought he was wrong in what he did, and was even hurt by it, maybe I could have picked up the phone and called him to talk it out. Maybe he could have done the same. But neither of us chose to do so. None of this justifies his later actions, nor his blatant dishonesty about what provoked them, but I do think it's a broader point that has validity. Maybe we should all be a little more careful in how we interact with people, especially those people we consider to be our friends. Maybe we should be less quick to dismiss those we think have done harm because of their views. There's a balancing act to be done between calling people out for toxic views and toxic behaviors and crossing the line into bullying ourselves. I stand by what I said about the false equivalence between firebranding on behalf of the marginalized and firebranding on behalf of the privileged. I think many in the atheist and secular movement do in fact agree on most important things. We may even agree on 99 out of 100 things. But the number of things we agree and disagree on is not the entire story. The thing to be considered is what that disagreement is actually about. If that one thing we disagree on is my right to call out transphobic behavior, the rest we agree on matters less. If that one thing is the fact that people of color get to be the authority on what constitutes racism, the rest we agree on matters less. There's much more nuance to be spoken of other than simply the number of things we do and don't agree on. David's commentary, even devoid of the context of this situation, makes an extremely valid point at how discourse often goes in our movement, especially when it comes to matters of social justice. I'm nearly always going to err on the side of defending the marginalized, but that doesn't mean we excuse any and all behavior in pursuit of that position. It's quite interesting that the person who attacked me defends his methods as, quote, holding up a mirror and, quote, bullying the bullies. It's interesting because even if I were guilty of this supposedly awful behavior, he has then become guilty of not only doing the same awful things he claims I'm guilty of, but doing them to the 10th power, becoming the bully himself, and not just becoming the thing he's against, but becoming worse than the thing he's supposedly against. I'd be very interested to see if he has any examples of that approach actually working. I have plenty of my own to provide in defense of my own approach, despite the mistakes I often make. When I started this whole thing a year and a half ago, I knew something like this would eventually happen. It's not the first time I've been publicly attacked because someone didn't like me, and I'm certain it won't be the last. In the end, I'm a big girl and I can handle it. I wouldn't put myself out there in the ways that I do if I wasn't on some level prepared to have these vulnerabilities used against me. I'm not saying it didn't hurt, I'm not saying it didn't make me angry, but I'm going to be okay. In a lot of ways, this situation simply reinforces the reason I chose to do this work in the first place. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. In light of David's commentary, I may certainly be a bit more careful in my dealings and interactions. I'll try harder to remind myself that I'm at all times dealing with complex human beings with lives and experiences of their own that got them to wherever they are. I may be willing to give people the benefit of the doubt more than I used to, but in the end, it will be because a friend chose to reach out to me and talk to me, instead of making a vicious public attack against me. Before I go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.